Hello, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome to one last little bit regarding case control studies. As a review, we looked at why we would want to do something do a study as a case control in the first place, because of the rare diseases. And then we looked at some of the types of ways to collect data and analyze data and think about the relationships between things. There are some important limitations always to the different kinds of studies we do. And I like to start off by thinking about that whole idea of evaluating the relationship. We hope to find a causal relationship a lot of times. But before we can conclude that we have some kind of causal relationship, we have to think about all the other possible choices. First of all, we could have some kind of random error. So I'm wrong, that would be error. Or we could have some kind of systematic error. Or I could have an association that's not causal. So specifically with the systematic error, it's really important to think about the way we assembled our two groups. How did we collect the people into our study? We have cases and we have controls. Did we manage to get groups that would actually measure this thing that we're trying to measure? And then in terms of other kinds of systematic or directional bias, we can have issues with measurement. People can remember things differently depending on the group they're in. There are other kinds of ways that we can measure things that are systematically different between those two groups, between the cases and the controls. With associated but not causal, be really careful about thinking about that exposure that you're trying to collect, whether it does have enough time to have caused the disease. Sometimes even we have issues with confounders, and that we need to include so that we aren't just evaluating the wrong thing. And then finally we can end up concluding that we have something that's possibly causal. Often our studies include all of these. There's a little bit of causal relationship, there might be some systematic error, there might be some random error, we might have a little bit of an issue with confounders that we haven't either been able to measure, and so it's a combination. And then finally, when we're doing any kind of studies, I like to think about making sure that the variables that you're using are actually the correct ones for that type of data analysis. It's interesting all the different kinds of things we can run and get data for, but we have to be smart enough to know that the study design does or doesn't allow us to interpret that in the way that we're interpreting it, or the actual variable type doesn't allow for that kind of an analysis. So just be careful about that. And finally, the whole idea of assumptions. Typically, with a chi-square test, that assumption is that the expected count needs to be at least 5 for each of the cells. Once we get larger than 2 by 2 tables, that can be modified just a little bit. But keeping in mind that all of these things, looking at the different reasons for the relationship, whether we have the correct variables, whether our assumptions are met so that what we are concluding is actually correct for that particular analysis, all of those are really important things to think about when we're doing a data analysis. So thank you for joining me on this little mini series on case control studies, and I look forward to the next one.